Well control is the discipline of preventing the uncontrolled release of hydrocarbons and implementing the correct procedures should an event occur. Well control is critical for the safety of rig personnel and the environment. It's our industry's public responsibility to ensure that we use the best training and methods to avoid and prevent these events. Our license to operate depends on it. This panel discussion, graciously sponsored by Maersk Training, will examine a landmark reinvention of well-controlled training through a new program called WellSharp. Hi, I'm Mike Killalea with IADC and drillingcontractor.org. I'll briefly introduce our panelists by name, job title, and company, leaving their full bios for later. Our first speaker is Mark Denkowski, IADC Executive Vice President, Operational Integrity. Mark will discuss the drivers for WellSharp and the overriding philosophy behind its development. Our next speaker, Brooke Polk, is IADC Competence and Learning Development Specialist. Brooke will cover teaching and testing aspects of the WellSharp program. Finally, we'll hear from Brian Manus, Assistant Director of Learning and Development for Diamond Offshore Drilling, Inc. Brian will speak from the trainer's perspective and describe what the real-life reaction to the new program has been. Please take a moment during the webcast or afterward to post questions for the panel. While we cannot answer questions in real time, the panelists will prepare responses which will be posted on this page. We'll shoot you an email when the responses are live. So Mark Denkowski has more than 30 years experience in the drilling industry. He serves as IADC Executive Vice President of Operational Integrity. In this capacity, Mark oversees IADC's array of technical committees and divisions. He also directs all operations of IADC accreditation programs, program development and implementation, general communications, and administration. Mark, welcome. What was the thinking behind the development of WellSharp?
Well, thanks, Mike. A little history before we get into exactly why we started WellSharp in itself. Back in the mid-90s, the industry asked for us to create an industry standard for well control training. Everything at IADC is driven by our members and the needs of our members and needs of an industry, so we set about that with the Well Control Committee, and in 1995, WellCap was launched. In 1997, WellCap was added to that. The workover and completions portion of WellCap was added. In 2001, coiled tubing, snubbing, and other well servicing services were added. And of course, in 2002, the deep water topics were incorporated because then deep water is becoming more of a topic and technology was starting to catch up with us. In 2002, the introductory level was added. 2003, the well servicing introductory is added, and so on and so forth. Other courses were reviewed, other courses were updated. This was a continuous process. And the reason I say that is that is how we got to WellSharp. This is an evergreen process. Well control changes. It keeps up with the technology of the industry and of the needs of the industry. And it became necessary to create the WellSharp program. It was actually started prior to Macondo. This review had been started, but Macondo obviously accelerated this. So why the change? Why WellSharp? Why do we go from WellCap to WellSharp? The industry demanded it. The industry said that we needed to improve the technical knowledge of all of our people on the rigs. We had to make sure that the skills that they had were the proper skills for the technology, as well as the fact that we measured those skills and we measured their competence and their knowledge. Also, it demanded that we improve the consistency of human behaviors. You know, in the past, training was training. Everybody trained, everybody kept a training matrix, and they realized that wasn't quite enough. So then we developed competency assessments. So we trained, we measured competence, and still we had some issues, and now we're into another phase of where we're starting to realize that human factors is an issue around all training and skills, knowledge, and retention. So we have that component that we're building into it as well. And of course the industry insisted that we improve process integrity, that the processes, it's all about safety, it's all about cost reduction, and it's also about increasing efficiency across the industry. So what was the response to all that? The industry demanded more efficient training. So what we did is we refocused the training around positions, but on the people on the rigs and their responsibilities with respect to well control training. A good example of that is a driller. What is a driller's true responsibility? It's kick detection and shut-in. So we refocused the courses to make sure that they focused on kick detection, shut-in, on barriers, barrier management, situational awareness. We added some human factors, behavioral factors to the training, and ensure, with the idea that that's the training that they will receive. We also, in response to the industry, are creating training specific to virtually every position on the rig that has well control responsibilities. Traditionally, we train drillers and assistant drillers. We train some of the marine crew. But now we're going to start focusing on other people such as mudloggers, cementers, and all the other people that have responsibilities that can aid the driller in more efficiently having a good well-control process to ensure the safety of the rig. And of course, the integrity of the knowledge assessment. It's been historically somewhat of a criticism of WellCap that the assessment, the knowledge assessment, could be better. In the past, we allowed the individual training providers to create their own tests, and there was integrity issues. Well, we've now have launched an electronic test system that's centralized, that's controlled by IADC and its members, who are the subject matter experts that help build the entire system, and Brooke will speak to that a little bit later. But that's a huge component of the new improved program, is the electronic knowledge assessment. We also added proctors. This was also a place where WellCap was weak. In the past, we did not have an independent proctor in the room. We now will. Again, adding to the credibility and the integrity of the system and of the knowledge assessment, it's critical. And this step, we think, is one of the major steps. In fact, we have employed Lloyd's Register to do this for us worldwide, but here in the U.S., in conjunction with Lloyd's and with IADC, we engaged the Wounded Warrior program to provide proctors for us. This is huge. We're finding out that we are the largest employer of wounded warriors across the country, and we're very proud of that. And these individuals have proven to be fantastic proctors for us, throughout the U.S. The industry demanded that we have an increased focus on auditing, and we've done that again through Lloyd's Register, who does our auditing worldwide. We believe that these programs need to be audited on a frequent basis, and we're going to do that. The whole idea that eliminating certificate mills, this is all part and parcel of that. We have to audit. We have to make sure we're on top of every bit of the quality of the systems. So what are the changes? In the past, we had 3 different levels. We had introductory, we had fundamental, and we had supervisor courses. In response to the OGP's 476 recommendation that was written, it was a great piece of work done by the WEC committee of the OGP. They recommended 5 levels, and we did adopt the 5 different levels. We went to awareness, introductory, driller, supervisor, and engineer. The first 4 levels are done and in place. The engineer will come early, towards the end of this year or early next year. And they focus on the skills necessary for people in the individual positions that they have. We do recommend or require, at least in our documentation, that people attend certain different levels. Unfortunately, we're not a regulatory agency. We're not a standard-setting agency, so we don't have the jurisdictional ability to enforce that. But we are getting with operators in the hopes that they will adopt this system, support this system, and through their drilling contracts and other means, actively and support this idea of making sure that people attend the courses that they should attend. The course lengths in general have changed because of the somewhat increased curriculum, and with this new focus, you can see from the slide that if you know the course lengths from before, but each have increased. The awareness is a new course, so it's a 4-hour orientation that will be intended for our office staff, or new people to the rigs. The introductory went from an 8-hour to a 16-hour, and it's refocused to more carefully train people to be a support mechanism for the driller and other people who have direct well control responsibility, kind of the eyes and ears in places where the driller are not. The driller course is focused on kick detection and shut-in and barrier management, and it's been refocused on that. So what really are the changes to the standard in addition to all that? It's the refocusing of the curricula by position. Drillers go to a driller class. They learn kick detection and shut-in. Supervisors go to supervisor classes, and they learn how to remediate a problem if there is a problem. And what's real important here is the fact that we now ask the driller and the supervisors to sit in separate classes. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, in many training schools, the drillers, the supervisors, and other people were combined in a class, and at the end of the class, different tests for different results were issued. That kind of was not the best way to deliver this training. We're finding that if we separate the drillers and the supervisors, they can more clearly focus on the materials that they need to know and nothing else. We will, of course, there will be some commingling of information so that each level understands what the other one does, but it's important that they focus on the materials that are important to them and the role responsibilities that they have with regard to well control. Regarding the knowledge test, we currently have the online test, which is launched very successfully. We'll be soon piloting the offline test, which will be intended for locations with limited connectivity or bandwidth issues, and it'll function exactly like the online test, but give that capability so that truly it's worldwide. We had to anticipate all the other locations worldwide so we could effectively deliver this knowledge assessment. Of course, to be centralized and controlled question database, the questions are randomized and with shuffled answers, with surveys and metrics that we'll collect, and Brooke will speak in great detail to all of that. Finally, back to Lloyd's. We think this is a real game changer. Through Lloyd's proctoring, independent proctoring. These are independent proctors that we don't have any input in other than to identify the locations where the proctoring services are required. Lloyd selects. They have a process for vetting the proctors. They have a process for with surveys for assessing the proctor's performance in the room during the knowledge assessments, and this is critical for the integrity of the system overall. They also do it already for us, which is it's a great combination of services. And of course, finally, we are increasing the requirements on our instructors. We accredit every instructor that is a WellCap instructor. WellSharp instructor and WellCap. But we're going to increase those requirements to truly test their knowledge, and we're going to ask them to take a train the trainer course to assure that they are true facilitators, that they're just not there to read slides, that they're to facilitate a conversation with the class and to more effectively transfer knowledge to the students, who then can transfer that knowledge to the workplace and have a true transfer of knowledge.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mark. Let me ask you, though, when will IADC require that all instructors teach to the new WellSharp standard?
We are mostly through the transition with all of our current training providers, and we'll have all of them transitioned by the end of September. Currently, of the providers who are already transferred, they represent about 80% of all the training that is done at this point anyway. But by September, everybody will be transitioned. We're actively bringing new programs into the process as well, even as we speak.
100% by September. That'll be great.
Yep.
So another question some of the registrants raised. If WellSharp is an industry-led, industry-developed program, why are some commercial schools offering their own certifications? Is that a red flag for safety?
Well, first off, let me say we don't think that they should. We think that it should be an industry-driven effort because of this, the key stakeholders in this are the ones that have designed WellSharp. Other companies who want to deliver something that they commercially build in-house, we don't think is as robust or as creditable as an accredited industry-driven system. If you have commercial entities doing their own thing, they tend to have a race to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it cheaper, faster, and better,
Sure.
which is just it is compromising safety. It's compromising the quality of the training. So we're not supportive of that.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Now that we've learned about the big picture of WellSharp, let's get into the nuts and bolts, the systems that IADC has put into place to make this program work. These topics will be addressed by our next speaker, Brooke Polk. Brooke is IADC Competence and Learning Development Specialist. In this capacity, she works on new accreditation program development and implementation, as well as the ongoing review and revision of existing programs. Before joining IADC, Brooke worked as an education administrator, curriculum designer and coordinator, trainer, and program developer. Brooke, thanks for being with us today. We've heard a lot about the vision of WellSharp, but it's a truism that the devil's in the details. So please fill us in on what it takes to make a system like WellSharp work.
Thank you, Mike. I want to start by just talking about how this system was developed. IADC is the place where the industry and our members come together to connect, collaborate, and to create. And through that connection and that collaboration, WellSharp was built and designed. So everything that we will talk about was built by the industry for the industry through their IADC membership. One of the significant improvements is the standardized knowledge assessment. What that knowledge assessment has now done is it's leveled the playing field. So no matter where an individual goes to take their training and their assessment, they will all be assessed to that same globally accepted standard. So if a driller in Egypt and a driller in Louisiana both take the exam, they're assessed at that same standard. With the knowledge assessment, it's also become randomized, so the questions are randomly generated, the answers are shuffled. So I can be sitting next to another person taking the exact same driller course, but my exam will look completely different. They are also now, like Mark had mentioned, independently proctored, and we are partnering with Wounded Warriors through Lloyd's Registered, and it's really about ensuring the quality and the integrity of the assessments. So not only about equaling out the playing field and making sure everyone's assessed to that higher level, but also making sure that the integrity is maintained throughout the testing process. We also now have enhanced guidelines for skills assessments. The skills assessments have been expanded, and the various types of assessments that are conducted have also been expanded upon. Individuals now must go through their own assessment for simulator skills assessment. It makes sure that that individual, when they get back on the rig site, can do what they were trained to do. And not only can they do it, but can they do it at the right time, and they can do it consistently. That is what shows that our people are competent. And going to an individualized, standardized assessment for skills and knowledge will help them to demonstrate that before we send them back onto the rig. We also have better quality assurance now with WellSharp. The providers are audited every 3 years, and their renewal is dependent upon successful completion of that audit. The testing process has been revolutionized. It's been completely upgraded and updated. Not only do we now have that standardized online assessment, but there's also development of an offline assessment which will function just as if you were running in an online environment. That allows the test to be delivered no matter where you are in the world. If you have connectivity issues, you'll never know it. The offline version that's being developed is going to function just as smooth as the online version. So there's really not going to be any downfall if you can't offer that online assessment. The students will still get the same quality assessment as those taking it in the online environment. It's also now the questions are centralized and controlled. That doesn't mean that IADC controls the questions and what the questions are and how they're reviewed. The review teams that go through these questions and develop the questions in the database were made from our members. It was the operators, the contractors, the training providers. We were the place that they came together to develop these questions for the industry. They are the SMEs. They're the ones that we rely on to make sure that what is asked in that test question database is in fact what our individuals need to demonstrate for their knowledge to be performing successfully in their positions on that rig. WellSharp is taking us to a new mindset. We're in a mindset of testing. Let's teach to the test, we have to pass a test. WellSharp is revolutionizing that mindset. It's now going from testing to learning. So let's look at the different ways that not only does the WellSharp database allow for testing enhancements, but how does it allow us to use it as a tool to develop our people? One of the things that it allows IADC to do is to monitor how providers are doing throughout the world. IADC can look into the system and see how each provider ranks, how their students are performing, and we can see how their instructors are performing. So if we notice any discrepancies, we can address them at that time. It also provides barometer of success. So not only can IADC see the metrics, but also the training provider and the students can see their metrics. They can gauge how their company is doing and compare those metrics with how the industry is doing as a whole to gauge where they need to improve and where their areas of strength are. We also have easy identification areas of improvement for instructors and for students. Students now are allowed to see what they have missed. If they score a certain percentage, they can review those missed questions. And every student is allowed to see the learning objectives that they miss. This is what's changing it from testing to a learning development environment. It's one thing if you hand a student a certificate and you send them back on the rig. The odds of a student making 100% is pretty slim. I haven't seen one yet. I'm sure there will be one soon. But what you have to do with those scores and that feedback is you now have to develop your people. You have to take those learning objectives, you have to close those knowledge gaps, because it's not just sufficient that someone passed with an 80. What is that missing 20%? What do we need to do to get them up to that 100% level? That's what it is a tool for. It allows you to not only identify those gaps, but use it as a resource to put a development plan in place, not only for your students, but also for your instructors. Okay. When instructors will start taking their assessment online as well, you can use the tool just the same for your instructors. What are their areas of strength? Identify the areas of improvement and build those instructors up, close those gaps to make sure that your company has the best instructors delivering the best training for our students. So we are positive that when our individuals go back on that rig, they've been trained with the best programs, by the best instructors, and have gotten the best feedback to close those competency gaps. We also get real-time feedback from the students. So the students are completing an online survey so that IADC can see and the providers can see what the students are saying about not only the instruction, but about the instructor themselves and the quality of the course that's been delivered. The game changer, like we mentioned, it's that electronic testing database. It's more than just a test. Just mentioned all the ways you can use it for a development tool. I'm going to give you a glimpse into what the actual WellSharp database system looks like. There's a few different access levels. One of them is an administrator level, the other is instructor, and then we have an IADC level that we can go through and view analytics. Administrators are able to go into the system and use it as a scheduling tool. So they can schedule their classes, they can manage classes a year in advance. They can also add students to a roster. They can add students, take them out of the class if they cancel. So it's really a management tool that it's been provided to the training providers so that they can manage their classes. Instructors are able to go in, once a class is scheduled to a particular instructor, they have the ability to see their calendar for the whole year. So they can actually look at every class that they have coming up, see how many students are in that class. They also have the ability, while students are testing, to monitor the progress in real time. You can see how many questions a student has answered. You can also see the time that they have remaining on the exam. And this is a way of monitoring their progress through the exam. Once the student has completed that exam, they also have the visibility of that score report. So instructors can access student score reports, see the questions and the learning objectives they've missed, and review those with the student to make sure that they know what areas they need to improve upon. Another great feature, so many times you hear, my student lost their certificate, what do I do, how do I get a new one? That's also a feature that has been built into this new database. So instructors and administrators can pull up at any time. It could be 2 years later. They can always access the records of their students, email the certificates, verify them, or even print out and provide a new copy. So it's always archiving infinitely the information, so the student records are never lost for that company. One of the great features that I just think is phenomenal, it's really what pushes it to a learning development tool, is that students are allowed to review what they missed. I can pass, but if you don't tell me what I missed, I'm not going to improve myself. I'm kind of guessing, it's a shot in the dark. What did I miss? Can I figure it out? And I think without that, what students are doing, they're walking away with that 80 or 90%, and we lose that opportunity to close those competency gaps for our employees. We're sending them out on the rig knowing that there are gaps that need to be closed. So allowing them to review these questions that they've missed and allowing them to see the learning objectives or the categories and topics that they've missed allows for that knowledge gap closure. That's going to be what gets you a competent employee, not a certificate that says I passed a test. That just means that you have a credential. What's going to get you an effective employee that performs safely and consistently is making sure that you're doing everything that you can to close those knowledge gaps and have them at the top level. That way they are always performing the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities for their particular position. Providers, like I mentioned earlier, can view their analytics, and some of the analytics that they have that they can measure and keep track of are how their students are performing based on the level of class that they've taken. They can also pull up and analyze how a particular instructor's students are performing and compare how their instructors perform against each other. It also can be used as a tool to gauge where they are in comparison with the industry. So if your students are performing at an 85% pass rate, you can use that data, see how you're compared with the industry, see what areas of improvement that you need. IADC analytics are a little bit different. We have a little bit more detailed view than the provider. At any time around the world, I can access a training provider's class and see their students' progress in real time. As a student in Egypt finishes their exam, IADC can actually pull it up and see what they have missed, and I can see what learning objectives that student needs to address. That feature was never available before. It certainly wasn't available in a paper assessment. So this online system has given us so many avenues for not only monitoring how our students are doing, but using that information to make them better and more competent employees. I mentioned earlier that IADC and IADC's work groups manage the questions in the database. We have a question review team, and what that review team does is they meet and they review any feedback that we get from students on questions or from instructors on the questions. They are currently going through the entire database, reviewing every single question for the third time to make sure that we in fact have got them as close to perfect as can be. One of the tools that IADC has in the database is that we can pull the questions that are frequently missed, and we can analyze those to see, are they frequently missed on a similar topic? And then we can provide that information to the training providers. Maybe it's something that we need to alter in the curriculum. Maybe it's something that our training providers need to show a little bit more focus on. So it's a way to show a gap in the training that we can put out there to our training providers and collaboratively come up with a solution to how to close those training gaps. We can also see where every class in the world is being held at any time. This could be used for monitoring how many classes around the world are being held, so we can see, are the majority in West Texas? Do we have a lot going on in Russia? And we can use that information to build our proctor network to make sure that we have adequate proctors located around the world. But we can also go in and use that for audit purposes. We can help plan and schedule audits around that information as well. What this tool really does, WellSharp to me is not a curriculum change. It's not a testing change. It's a concept change of well control because it includes so many different avenues of change that it's really raising the bar on our competency level of our employees. And I think anything less than what WellSharp is related to well control is just jeopardizing the safety of our employees, the safety of the equipment, the environment, and jeopardizing our license to operate. Because this is the higher level, and I think we're doing it injustice if we don't train our people and develop our people to this higher level. And with that, I just want to say, I think it's so important that this was designed for the industry and by the industry because they are the people that know what our employees need. They're the ones with them day in, day out. So I think that that is what is going to make WellSharp the success and the continued success that you will see with it.
Wow, thank you very much, Brooke. There are a lot of sophisticated systems in place to make this program really to the next level. Just all other things aside, just the transition from testing to learning is like a step change, I think, in our industry's knowledge management. So that's great. What about outside the U.S.? What's the status and the timeline for rolling out WellSharp around the world?
WellSharp has actually already been launched internationally and on a global scale. There is training going on currently. Just a few places that I can recall right now, we have training in Malaysia, Russia, India, Egypt, Australia, just to name a few, Brazil, Spain. And what we have currently is the online test is available only in English. But that doesn't hinder those other languages from delivering WellSharp. So what we have done is we've designed the testing database to incorporate those languages until they're translated. Translations for those will come by end of year. Okay. They're going to roll out. Our first phase will be on Portuguese and Spanish, and then we're going to continue to roll those translations into the database. But what we're doing is we're having the training providers deliver the WellSharp content, and they're giving their approved WellCap paper exam. They still use the WellSharp system just as they would be giving the online exam. So that means they schedule it in the system, they still use a proctor, and the certificate is still generated in the system. The only difference is they are entering a paper score into the system instead of the system grading the online exam.
Sure. Okay. Very good. Brooke, also some of our registrants were seeking more detail about what they're calling the must-pass questions. Are those already incorporated in the test database, and why are they important?
The must-pass questions are already incorporated into the test database. They're not turned on currently as must-pass. Before we do that, we will give advance notice of when we will be turning those on. Questions are still being vetted, like I mentioned, for that third time. We want to make sure that we have them correct before we even move to those must-haves or to those translations. It's key that we get them right the first time.
Sure.
When those will be turned on, we're going to notify everyone in advance. But what we are doing is, the reason we have those, the importance behind those, is because there are some critical knowledge, skills, and abilities that an individual must know. They should not be working in that position if they don't have those. Because what they do, if they don't have those competencies, they are jeopardizing the safety of personnel, the safety of operations, equipment, and the environment, and overall our license to operate as an industry. So they're crucial.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brooke. Excellent presentation. So folks, now that we understand the ins and outs of both the philosophy and implementation of WellSharp a little better, let's hear about how it's working in the real world. Brian Manus's passion is training and developing others to help make the drilling business safer and more efficient. Brian is Assistant Director of Learning and Development for Diamond Offshore Drilling, Inc. He began his career in the offshore drilling business in late 1978 as a roustabout. He subsequently held a number of positions on several different types of offshore rigs. Brian was instrumental as the rig go-to guy for new hire training, in fact, and that led him in 1997 to become an instructor in Diamond Offshore's Houston-based training department. He advanced through the ranks in learning and development to assistant manager, and finally his current position as assistant director. Brian has taught IADC WellCap, Well Control, from its inception in 1995. He's worked on numerous committees, engaged in developing the IADC WellSharp program, and is a certified facilitator. Brian, would you kindly share your experience with us in implementing WellSharp since its launch in April?
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to IADC for inviting me to participate in this event. As Mike mentioned, my name is Brian Manus. I manage the trainers, the course curriculum, the schedules, the quality of content within the Learning and Development Department for Diamond Offshore Drilling. I am responsible for the competency programs for all our rig crews worldwide. Well control falls squarely within one of those highest priorities and on my shoulders. Diamond Offshore has delivered internal well control training courses to its crews since the early 80s. Originally, we followed the MMS standard, followed with the implementation of the WellCap standard in 1995. We have implemented the new WellSharp curriculum testing and database proctor system approximately 3 months ago. This implementation of WellSharp has gone really well. We started rolling it out, and internally we saw the only problem we were having was the fear from the students on their electronic testing. The paper test is what they've always been used to. They always used a pencil and an eraser to do this. Now they're sitting in front of a computer. The fears caused some to fail. When retested, they were able to pass with significantly higher scores than the initial test. I attributed this fear to electronics, which they have overcome on the second test. If their knowledge issues, they would have failed the test the second time, or at least not increased their score significantly. We found questions and answers within the database that needed tweaking. I'm happy to report that IADC, Brooke, and team have stepped up and has corrected all those issues, and testing is going very well. With the use of a proctor is a new concept to Diamond. We weren't accustomed to having them in our shop. This has worked flawlessly for us. The good news about it is they're all wounded warriors. Once, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, that's really at the top of my list. I love the use of the wounded warriors. Supporting the wounded warriors is, I think, the best thing that the IADC and the industry's done. They come in, they check IDs, they take a look at the students' items on their desk to make sure they meet the WellCap guidelines that have been set, and they explain the testing rules to the students and to the instructor before the test begins. They're very flexible if you need them to stay longer for a retest. We had one event where the proctor was unable to designate his time due to a scheduling problem or miscommunication. We called Lloyd's. They gave us an emergency code to place in the proctor sign-in field, and it worked perfectly. We continued with the testing process. The transition from WellCap to WellSharp is an important one. It's important to mention that WellCap in itself was a very strong program. It's primarily in its curriculum. The gap that we're closing is development and implementation of WellSharp is primarily on the assessment side of the standard. Although the curriculum has been upgraded for WellSharp, it is a new method of assessment that provides the ability not only for assess our crews and well control knowledge, but also the quality of our training providers around the world. The world of drilling varies vastly from one region to another. It varies from the offshore to the onshore environment. It varies from one country to another. The methods we use to deliver well control training content at Diamond may differ from the methods that are used on a land drilling company or folks working for operators. We all know that learning styles can vary significantly across different cultures. Training should be different depending on our operational circumstances. With that said, our industry needs to say with confidence that regardless of the method we use to deliver training, the crews are assessed using the same content and measuring stick. We need to be measured against standardized, industry-developed, and approved assessments. Now, this will help us identify high-performing regions, training providers, companies, and even positions, those areas that need to be improved. The testing database provides us just a vehicle that pinpoints the strengths and weaknesses on both macro and micro levels. We've never had the ability in the past, and it will enable us to shift curriculum focus in any of the areas and weaknesses found during the assessment process. Now, from Diamond's perspective, that is critically important to continue to drive development of our employees. In addition, from our perspective, we now able to compare Diamond's performance as a training provider as well as the performance of our crews to the average around the industry, which we think is a tremendous tool to help us make our training better. Finally, from a general consumer's perspective, contractors and operators will be able to quantify the quality of the training provider in the world. They will finally be able to answer that age-old question, what am I getting for my money? I would like to say thanks to the staff at IADC, especially Brooke Pope, Brenda Kelly, and Gerardo Barrera, and Malcolm Lodge for the quick response to all our needs and issues and the incredible work you have done to make WellSharp a reality. It has been a taxing process, but you've done a great job getting us there, and it's working beautifully. I hope this helped provide a perspective from the drilling contractor and training providing point of view. Thank you for allowing me to share my experience and during and after the implementation of IADC WellSharp program.
Thank you, Brian, for such an upbeat presentation. That's really glad it's working out well, and it's not going to do anything but improve. But Brian, some of our registrants wondered about the role-specific training. How is that working out? Having separate driller and supervisor courses, does that demand more resources, or significantly more, or what do you think?
It did demand a little more resources. We did have to increase our class numbers because of separating the positions based on position count while on our rigs. But overall, it's actually been a very good thing because now we're more position-specific training, and I see better scores coming out of it. I see people more interested in what they're doing in the training.
All right, well, thanks again, Brian. Now let's open the discussion. We received some great questions from the registrants. Panel, the viewers were interested to learn whether candidates can take a pre-test to determine the appropriate level of WellSharp training for their competency skills. Is that possible or even desirable?
I'll speak to that. One of the things that we pride ourselves in this development is listening to the feedback that we get from our providers. And like Brian mentioned in his presentation, the anxiety that the students had was a huge factor in their testing. So they've told us that, and what we've done is developed an assessment for every level, and it is available as a sample assessment, 15 questions. It will function just like the real system to give them that ease of their anxiety so that they can see what the system looks like, what it feels like, so that when they take the real thing, they're prepared. They're not seeing it for the first time. So that is available on the IADC website for students.
Okay, excellent.
Mike, if I could add,
Absolutely.
I think to that question, what the system does not do, though, as the question indicated, is it set a competency level for an individual and say, you've attained a level where you can go to the supervisor course or to the driller's course. That should be determined by the role of the person. A driller should go to a driller course, supervisor should go to a supervisor course. So the system is not meant to measure their competence and say which course they should.
Well, it certainly seems to make sense.
Yeah,
The levels of responsibility are quite different. So, Mark, moving forward, do you see an opportunity for people to take well control refresher training during the 2-year certification cycle?
I do. In fact, we will soon be working on a system that reinforces the the knowledge throughout the certification period. You know, we want to continue to reinforce that. If that includes some sort of a reassessment at 1 year at the midpoint, that can be part of it. But I think we need to continuously touch the students with reassess, with kind of reinforce the knowledge, make sure that they can prove that they still have the skills and the knowledge to do the job, and it hasn't gone gone cold in there.
Okay.
You know.
So, given that, would online training be applicable for these refreshers? Or?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a combination of online training, some on-site practical assessments, and/or exercises that they can do on the rig. But it'd be a combination, kind of a blended learning kind of setup once it's in place. I think is hugely valuable.
Okay. So for accrediting institutions, we're obviously looking at the instructors and many other things, but what about the facility itself? Is there a separate accreditation for that, or does it have to meet any standards?
The actual accreditation itself, when a training provider applies for accreditation, part of that accreditation packet that gets reviewed by our technical committee of SMEs is that they submit a floor plan. That floor plan outlines exactly what their training facility will look like. It details out the equipment, the exact type of simulators that are used. So that is already incorporated as part of the application process.
Okay. So I understand instructors don't have access to the test questions, right? And why can't they? And we've had some feedback that some of the WellSharp questions are kind of subjective. Could you all speak to that?
I think Brian could have an opinion about that as well. But the intention is not to allow them to have access to all the questions for the integrity of the test. Obviously, we are continuously working with our industry work groups, the SMEs, to improve the test, to take subjectivity out of it, to make sure that we're truly testing knowledge, not their ability to take a test or to read a test question. We do allow the instructor, with guidance of the proctor in the room, to clarify questions. But again, it's not intended that we just pass out the questions to all the training providers so that they can try to design the course around the test. It should be the other way around.
Okay.
And I don't know what your experience
Brian,
is.
you have anything to add?
Agreed. And the only thing we're seeing is the difference in the number. I mean, they're not subjective questions. What we're seeing is that the industry went together to develop the questions, and they came from all over the world, and they came from different parts of the United States. So the terminology sometime in the question is different from what you're accustomed to using. Example, we may call it one person may call it a casing gauge, other person calls it a choke gauge. It's the same item, it's just difference in nomenclature, and that was a stumbling point at first, but once you learn to incorporate that in your training, not a problem at all.
But you bring up a great point as well. In this industry, we struggle to standardize the industry and standardize taxonomy, and maybe this will be one of the tools that we help, at least around roll control, to get more of a standardized set of definitions, a set of references, so that when you do move from region to region, you're not surprised by a new term or a new definition of something, that there is a standard set of terms and taxonomy across the industry, and certainly roll control.
Yeah, that's important.
And I think the WellSharp testing and assessment and curriculum will help do that without a doubt.
Yeah.
I would like to add to that. The database is actually built for instructor and student feedback. IADC has a process for test question review where when students and instructors review their question, each question is uniquely identified with a little numeric alpha code that allows the instructors and the students to give IADC feedback. And then our review team will take that feedback, edit the question as needed, or we even have the ability, if it is a question that needs to be turned off, IADC can go into the system, turn that question off until the review team has an opportunity to review it and edit it. That way no student is getting that question until it has been thoroughly reviewed again based on the suggestion provided.
Very good. But now, of course, we are in a severe down cycle. And can service providers, participants generally, can we all afford the increase in fees and costs for the new program?
From my perspective as a drilling contractor, we cannot afford to do anything but go forth to do this the right way. Our company couldn't stand an incident. We haven't had one, but
Yeah.
just as in no other rest of the industry can't take an incident. So we've got to continue to make this better. If it costs more money to do that, so be it. It's the cost of doing business, but we need to do this right.
Yeah, per student, there are increases to the cost of this, but they're somewhat minimal. As you have more employees, that gets to be more of a burden. But as Brian said, we certainly cannot not take this on, for the added cost, because the alternatives are just not acceptable.
We talked about the test questions quite a bit. Is there any suggestion that we might adjust them to increase the pass rate
I don't see a reason to adjust for pass rate. You adjust the questions to test for knowledge content. That was the only reason you'd ever adjust a test question from a trainer's perspective.
Yeah, from IADC's perspective, we would never try and reduce the quality of the questions just to increase the pass rate. We are very interested in testing knowledge. So we will continuously, create new questions and improve on the questions that are there to make sure that they are very clear, that they're very easily read, very easily understood, and we're truly testing the person's knowledge. We certainly would never reduce the standard of the questions so that we get a better pass rate. That is just not even.
Yeah, that would not enhance as part of the testing to learning process.
That would reduce the quality of
Yeah.
the system significantly if we did that.
Absolutely.
Right, and as I mentioned earlier, Mike, the purpose of this test is not to hand out a certificate. That certificate does not mean anything when that individual goes to the rig. What means something is what knowledge they have learned in that class, what they have retained, and what they can bring with them on that work site, and that they can use that knowledge and apply it consistently and in a safe manner to make sure that they're operating in the way that the industry thinks they should.
Okay, great. How does the emergence of ISO 9001:2015, which replaced the 2008 edition, affect quality management of WellSharp?
IADC's accreditation for ISO is not particularly around the WellSharp program. It accredits our means of how we manage our programs. And so that's going to be internal to IADC. We'll look at the different ways to manage our programs more effectively going forward based on the new procedures and requirements of that new ISO standard.
Okay. Will WellSharp become the default recommendation of the Well Control Institute for training? Or?
Well, the Well Control Institute, we will be asking them to endorse a well control standard to which all training should adhere to. So that's more the direction we're going than a direct WCI endorsement of WellSharp, but certainly we hope that that's the case.
Okay. Could you kind of estimate what was the input ratio for U.S. SMEs versus non-U.S. SMEs in developing the WellSharp program?
Well, I think across the board, it's the industry. So, many of the companies that participate are international companies, and there were people from across the spectrum participating in this effort. We held WellSharp advisor panel meetings in Aberdeen as we did in Houston. So the new program represents, as Brian I think said in his presentation, it represents the industries. It represents land, it represents offshore, it represents different segments of offshore and land as well. And there may be some taxonomy issues, but that would be it. I mean, it does clearly represent the industry as a whole.
Panel, how closely is WellSharp aligned with the guideline IOGP 476? Does IDC assist or plan on assisting other work groups concerning well control curricula, like mudloggers?
Well, we're closely aligned with the 476. In fact, we have Steve Kropler sits on the WEC committee that was a developer of the 476. We thoroughly reviewed it. We decided what we thought was important to incorporate it into the new WellSharp, and where we thought we could exceed the requirements of 476, we informed them of that as well. Now, they are in a rewrite process. They're going to slightly modify 476, and when that comes, we will review that as well, see if we're still all in line with the general principles of WellSharp and our members' needs, and we'll implement any changes necessary or comment accordingly.
Okay. And Steve, just for the benefit of our audience, Steve Kropler is IDC Vice President Offshore, and he was instrumental really in the development of the original WellCap way back in the day, 20 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you all for such a great panel. I'd just like to leave us all with what are the next steps? What remains to be done? What challenges are ahead? Could you all weigh in on that?
Well, the challenges are endless because this is an evergreen program. We have to modify our well servicing curriculums, which are currently still in a WellCap format. They will be moved over to a WellSharp format by our work groups, and we'll hope to have that done early next year. We do have to complete the engineering level, the course that's the last one. The engineering course is focused on people who have well construction design responsibilities, primarily operating personnel. But anybody that has a hand in designing a well would go through this sort of course. And of course, there's just the improvement to the ongoing improvement to the course. It's never going to stop evolving. It's never going to stop keeping up with technology and the changes and the more challenging environments that we have to operate in and do it safely and efficiently. So it's a continuous evergreen process.
I agree. The testing process will continue to be upgraded, the curriculum will be upgraded, and I think our analytics are going to get better. We're going to use our analytics to make it better. So I think it's going to be a big circle that comes together to make a better system every day.
Well, and one last thing too, we're going to get better and better at helping the end user, the student, prepare for these courses. And we're going to help them retain the knowledge, which will continuously keep them prepared for having to go through this recertification period when it's required. So we're going to get better at every aspect of this as we go forward.
Okay, well, that's about all we have time for. Thanks to our panelists for their excellent presentations, and thanks again to Maersk Training for sponsoring this virtual panel discussion. Please submit any questions you wish through the webcast page. We'll post answers as promptly as possible and notify all registrants. This virtual panel discussion will be posted online at drillingcontractor.org and IADC.org for the next year. So feel free to return and definitely tell your colleagues. On behalf of drillingcontractor.org and IADC, thanks for tuning into this event. Stay safe and keep turning to the right. I'm Mike Killalea. We'll see you next time.